So what happened at Chernobyl? So let me just make this full screen. These are some images taken of sort of the semi-immediate aftermath of the meltdown at Chernobyl. And this photograph on the right is, I believe, several weeks or months after the meltdown itself. Okay, so where is Chernobyl? It's in the Ukraine, but it's actually very close to the country of Belarus. So it's on the river that separates Belarus from Ukraine. So actually, even though Chernobyl is in Ukraine, a lot of the devastating impacts of the disaster were felt in Belarus, and a Belarusian scientist actually played an integral role in the aftermath of Chernobyl, and that's in the HBO special as well. So what actually happened? So it's classified as an accident. It happened in 1986, April 1986. Chernobyl was a nuclear power plant in the USSR. Ukraine was at that time part of the USSR, and it was part of the Soviet Union's push to kind of create this utopian nuclear energy future. They were, we were sort of, the Cold War was waning, but throughout the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the USSR was, attempting on a global stage to, present themselves as a superpower, and filled with the most brilliant minds and cutting edge science and utopic vision of the future. And part of that utopia, included in that utopia, was a fossil fuel free vision of the future, and that was going to be brought about by nuclear power plants. And so the nuclear power plant at Chernobyl was one of those many nuclear power plants that the Soviet Union constructed during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So Chernobyl was located actually right here. Okay, you can see on the river. And even though it's called the Chernobyl reactor and the Chernobyl power plant, a city was constructed very close to Chernobyl, where the workers and everyone who is sort of involved in the nuclear power plant itself could live. And that city was Pripyat, Pripyat, Pripyat. So if you hear me say Pripyat, that's the town that was actually closest to the Chernobyl reaction, not Chernobyl itself. And then you can see that the capital of the Ukraine, Kiev, was also not too far away. So what happened? So the accident occurred during an experiment scheduled to test the viability of a potential safety emergency core cooling feature, which required just a normal reactor shutdown. So they're just shutting down the reactor to do this, to run this experiment. It's kind of difficult to sort of explain what happened without just showing the video, which is why I'm going to show the HBO video, because I think it does a much better job than text and pictures of kind of illustrating what was going on that night. So what happened was two things. There was some operator error involved, and there was also some unknown problems with the reactor itself, which were only later discovered by scientists studying this many months and years later. Okay, and you'll see that again also in the video. So what happened was, as the reactor was shut down, the power in the reactor, okay, dropped too quickly. It wasn't shut down properly, in a process known as reactor poisoning. Okay, so power levels dropped really low. Okay, so then they started the experiment, and everything went haywire. The power was too low, and so actually then the power shot up to catastrophic levels. A button was pressed, which inserted the control rods as part of the experiment into this extremely high generating environment, right? So they thought it was off, but because it was too low, it actually ended up being ironically too high, okay? And then they're putting the rods in, and the rods themselves are where the uranium for the power generation and the chain reaction take place. And that's what we discussed last time. So power generation spiked now, so it dropped to 200 megawatts, okay, which is way below where they wanted it to be for this experiment. They were running this safety experiment, okay, and they wanted it to be around 1,000. It dropped to 200, so this caused it to actually shoot up to 33,000 megawatts, which, with the rods inserted into the reactor trying to do this experiment, caused a chain of explosions which released radioactive steam into the atmosphere in what is known as, or what is now known to have been an explosion. So the reactor itself exploded. So this all happened very quickly, okay? And I don't believe that the official sort of diagnosis is that there was an immediate meltdown, because a meltdown would happen later as things start to get too hot and start to melt. But there was an explosion, and the problem was no one thought there was an explosion. Nobody thought there was an explosion because no one thought that this reactor could explode. It was not supposed to explode. And folks suggesting that it had exploded were told that it did not explode. And there's a number of reasons for this, which the HPS special really interrogates very well. Some of the reasons were political. Some of them were truly just a scientific misunderstanding. And some of them were made out of panic, right? But the general understanding at the time was that this reactor could not explode. It did explode, but there was a lot of like, no, it did not explode. People with their fingers in their ears. There was also specific directive from people higher up that no word of this could escape, you know, to the press or to the larger international community. And so there was a lot of I mean, I guess we would call it gaslighting, to be honest with you. Gaslighting that what actually happened did not happen. People were told, no, it did not happen. It did not explode. And so a lot of the effects of this disaster are due to that component of it rather than the explosion itself. Okay? Because it exploded, because a nuclear reactor exploded, it wasn't just a fire, okay? Even though there was a fire that needed to be put out, but it was a radioactive fire. There was a lot of radioactive material that escaped this reactor, which literally blew up. And you can see here, this picture is from above the reactor looking down, and you can see that the reactor itself has blown up, okay? And so because of this, the firemen were called in, but Pripyat, the city, was not evacuated, despite being very close in proximity to the reactor. So several of the people working in the reactor itself and several of the firemen within hours started to fall ill. And radioactive poisoning is horrifying. It's horrifying. It attacks your skin and your digestive tract first. Basically, the parts of your body that are most readily exposed to the air, right? So your digestive tract, even though it's like inside of your body, you can kind of think of it as being outside because it's connected by two holes on either end, right? And so that you know, is very strongly affected by radioactive poisoning, which is why there's almost immediately a lot of vomiting, a lot of nausea. Those are customary signs of too much radiation. Your skin also starts to get burnt, essentially, but not right away. Not like you burned yourself with a flame, but it takes a while, and it gets red and hot and starts to flake off. So within hours of the explosion, several people start to fall ill, reporting headaches and metallic taste in their mouths, as well as coughing and vomiting, right? All customary signs of radioactive poisoning. So even though the plant was run by authorities in Moscow and operators in the Ukraine were there, there was a lot of miscommunication and no one was really immediately aware of what was going on. So the explosion occurred early in the morning on April 26th, but the city wasn't evacuated for a full 24 hours after. Okay, so think about that. There's a city full of innocent people, which is not evacuated for a full day after this explosion. A lot of that had to do with scientific misunderstandings and political pressure to not make a scene. So before the city was even evacuated, 2 people had already died and 50 people were already in the hospital before the city was evacuated. So somebody knew something was going on. In the vicinity of the reactor core, okay, radiation levels were measured at about 300 sieverts per hour, okay? The lethal dose of radiation is considered 5 sieverts per hour. So in the immediate vicinity of the radioactive core, in the reactive core, the dosage, okay, is 60 times greater than the lethal dose, okay? So it's very high dosage of radiation, and throughout the plant, you have levels ranging from anywhere between 5 and a massive 30,000 sieverts per hour, okay, including 3 to 5 sieverts in the control room itself. So a day goes by. There's a lot of craziness going on, and eventually Pripyat is evacuated. And as Pripyat is being evacuated, the USSR, the Soviet Union, is making a calculated decision not to say anything about this to the international community. Scientists in Belarus had detected high radiation levels very far away from the Ukraine, from the Chernobyl power plant, alerted the Soviet Union and were told to zip it. Part of this is because, again, the Soviet Union is trying to project this utopian image at the time of a future of nuclear power, a utopian future with nuclear power. So it actually didn't become known to the international community that there was this fallout, this nuclear fallout, devastating nuclear fallout, until Sweden, very far away, okay, started measuring elevated levels of cesium-137, which is a radioactive byproduct of this explosion itself. And on April 28th, they ruled out that one of their power plants was leaking, and they were able to eventually trace it all the way back to Chernobyl. And it was then 2 days after the explosion, 2 full days after the explosion of Chernobyl, that the international community was notified that there was a deadly explosion at Chernobyl, and there was nuclear fallout spreading across Europe and really across the planet. Okay, by this point it's too late. It's in the atmosphere, and there's not much we can do about it. So there was a lot of environmental fallout, which I will discuss, which is being discussed in the coming slides here, which I'll upload as a separate video to YouTube. So there's a lot of stuff here that we'll talk about in that. Okay, so that's just sort of what happened at the immediate time.